There I was, standing on the sidewalk in the pouring rain, holding a cardboard box that contained the last 5 years of my life. A security guard, a man I used to joke with every single morning, was standing by the revolving doors, making sure I didn't try to get back in. I had just been fired, blacklisted, and humiliated in front of the entire executive board. But to understand how I went from being the company's rising star to a cautionary tale, we need to rewind 18 months. You might think you know how this story goes. You've seen the movies where the ambitious assistant falls for the charming CEO and they ride off into the sunset while the credits roll. But let me tell you, Hollywood lied to you. What if I told you that the most dangerous thing you can do for your career isn't missing a deadline or losing a client, but falling in love with the person who signs your paycheck? You're about to find out exactly how a dream romance can turn into a professional nightmare. It started at Apex Marketing. This wasn't just a job, it was the job. The kind of place where the coffee is free, the stress is high, and the potential for burnout is just a badge of honor. I was 26, hungry, and ready to take over the world. I had just been promoted to senior strategist, a role that usually went to people 10 years my senior. I felt untouchable. Enter Julian. He was the newly appointed VP of Operations. He was 38, charismatic, and had that specific kind of effortless intelligence that makes everyone else in the room feel like they're moving in slow motion. He didn't just walk into a room, he commanded it. The first few months were strictly professional. Actually, they were better than professional. They were inspiring. Julian took me under his wing. He saw my potential. We would stay late, whiteboard markers in hand, mapping out campaigns that would eventually win us industry awards. I told myself this was mentorship. I told myself I was learning from the best. But looking back, I can see the subtle shifts in the atmosphere. It's the little things you ignore at first. The lingering eye contact during a budget meeting. The emails sent at 11 p.m. that started with work, but drifted into personal questions about my life, my dreams, my fears. The way he'd stand just a little too close when looking over my shoulder at my monitor. It felt electric. It felt like being chosen. The line finally blurred on a Tuesday in November. We were in Chicago for a client pitch. The presentation had gone flawlessly, and the adrenaline was high. We ended up at the hotel bar, celebrating. One drink turned into 3, and the conversation shifted from quarterly projections to personal histories. He told me his marriage had been over for years, that they were just coexisting for appearances. It's the oldest line in the book, isn't it? But sitting there, under the dim amber lights, with his undivided attention focused solely on me, I believed him. When he reached across the table and brushed my hand, I didn't pull away. I didn't think about HR policies or power dynamics. I just thought about how good it felt to be wanted by someone so powerful. For the first 3 months, it was exhilarating. We had this secret world that no one else knew about. We'd steal glances across the conference table, knowing that later that night, we'd be together. It felt like we were partners in crime. I felt like I had an edge. I knew what was happening at the executive level before anyone else. I felt protected. But that protection came with a price I wasn't calculating. Slowly, my work identity started to dissolve into my identity as Julian's girlfriend. even if nobody else knew it yet. I stopped challenging his ideas in meetings because I didn't want to rock the boat at home. I started taking on his enemies as my own. If Julian didn't like a certain account manager, suddenly I didn't trust them either. I was losing my objectivity, and worse, I was losing my independence. Then came the paranoia. Every time he closed his office door with a female colleague, my stomach dropped. Not because I was jealous of them romantically, but because I knew how he operated. I knew how he used charm as a weapon because he had used it on me. I started overanalyzing every interaction. Was he being too nice to me in public? Was he being too mean to throw people off the scent?
And then the rumor started. You can't hide energy. People aren't stupid. My coworkers, people I considered friends, started to distance themselves. The invites to happy hour stopped coming. Conversations would die down when I walked into the break room. I realized later that they didn't see me as a peer anymore. They saw me as a spy for management. I had isolated myself completely, trading the respect of my team for the affection of my boss. But here is where the story takes a turn you might not expect. I thought the worst-case scenario was us getting caught and getting a slap on the wrist. But to understand how I ended up on that sidewalk with a box, we have to talk about the Project Phoenix disaster. The mid-year review was coming up, and the company was restructuring. Tensions were high. Julian was under immense pressure to cut costs in his department. I remember him coming to my apartment one night, looking more stressed than I'd ever seen him. He asked me to run a confidential audit on my own team's efficiency. He said he needed someone he could trust to look at the numbers objectively. I felt uncomfortable. These were my friends, my peers. But he framed it as saving the department. He said if we could trim the fat in the budget, we could save jobs. So I did it. I stayed up for 3 nights straight, analyzing timesheets and project outputs. I gave him a report that highlighted inefficiencies, fully expecting us to discuss it and find a solution together. Instead, he took that report directly to the CEO. The next Monday, 3 people from my team were laid off. They were blindsided, and when they asked why, the rumor mill, fed by subtle leaks from upper management, pointed the finger at me. The narrative wasn't that Julian had cut costs. It was that I had thrown my team under the bus to climb the ladder. Julian had used my work, my trust, and my analysis to do his dirty work, keeping his hands clean while I looked like the villain. When I confronted him about it, the mask slipped. The charming, supportive mentor was gone. In his place was a cold, calculating executive. He told me, "It's business. You wanted to be a leader? This is what leadership looks like. Sometimes you have to make the hard calls." That was the moment the glass shattered. I realized I wasn't his partner. I was his asset. And assets are disposable. I tried to break it off. I told him I couldn't do this anymore, that the relationship was toxic and it was affecting my integrity. I thought, naively, that we could go back to being professional colleagues. I thought I could just be the senior strategist again. But you don't dump the boss and get away with it. Not when the boss is someone like Julian. Over the next few weeks, my life at work became a psychological war zone. Suddenly, my projects were being reassigned. I was left off email chains for meetings I should have been leading. My requests for resources were ignored or lost in the shuffle. It was gaslighting on a corporate scale. He wasn't firing me. He was making my life so miserable that I would quit. But I was stubborn. I refused to leave.
I'd worked too hard for this position. I doubled down, documenting everything, trying to prove my value solely through my output. Then came the final blow. The merger. Apex was being acquired by a larger conglomerate. This was the big payout everyone had been waiting for. As part of the due diligence, the acquiring company was interviewing key staff. I was scheduled to meet with a new transition team. Before the meeting, Julian called me into his office. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten. He just looked at me with this pitying expression and said, "I think it would be best if you didn't mention our history. It wouldn't look good for your future here." My future? He was worried about his golden parachute. If the new owners found out the VP of operations was sleeping with a subordinate and using her to manipulate department audits, he would be a liability. I walked into that interview and I had a choice. I could tell the truth about the toxic culture, about the manipulation, about why the team morale had tanked, or I could keep my mouth shut and hope to survive the merger. I chose to be professional. I focused on the work. I didn't say a word about Julian. It didn't matter. 2 days later, I was called into HR. Not the new company's HR, but our internal director. Julian was sitting there, looking solemn. They told me that irregularities had been found in my expense reports from the Chicago trip, the one where our relationship started. They claimed I had expensed personal items. It was a fabrication, a twisting of receipts for client dinners that Julian had approved himself. But his signature wasn't on the approval line anymore. It had been digitally altered in the system, or he had claimed he never signed it. It was his word against mine. And then the kicker. The HR director looked at me and said, "We've also received anonymous complaints regarding an undisclosed relationship that has created a hostile work environment for your team." He had reported me. He had gone to HR first, spun a story that I was the one pursuing him, that I had become obsessive and unprofessional when he tried to keep things platonic. He projected every single one of his actions onto me. Because he was the VP and I was the subordinate, and because he had gotten to the narrative first, I was the liability. I was the problem that needed to be removed before the merger went through. They gave me the option: resign with a small severance and sign a non-disclosure agreement, or be fired for cause with nothing. I looked at Julian. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. He was checking his watch, probably thinking about his next meeting or his lunch reservation. That's when I realized that the man I thought I loved never actually existed. I fell in love with a reflection of who I wanted to be: powerful, successful, decisive. But the reality was just a coward in an expensive suit. I signed the papers. I took the box. I walked out into the rain. The aftermath wasn't pretty. The industry is small. People talk. I wasn't just the girl who got fired. I was the girl who had a scandal. I applied for jobs I was overqualified for and got rejected. Recruiters who used to headhunt me stopped returning my calls. I had to move to a different city and pivot to a completely different sector just to get a foot back in the door. It took me 3 years to get back to the salary level I was at when I left Apex. So, when I hear people talk about office romances, like they're a fun way to spice up the 9 to 5, I have to laugh. Because the reality isn't a rom-com. The reality is that power dynamics are real, and they are undefeated. When you mix your heart with your livelihood, you are handing someone the power to destroy both. I lost my job, my reputation, and my financial security. But the biggest thing I lost was my trust in my own judgment. It took a long time to forgive myself for not seeing the red flags, for valuing his validation over my own intuition. If you are sitting there right now, thinking about that cute coworker, or maybe even your boss, and thinking, we can keep it professional, or no one will know, please, take it from me. The thrill of the secret is not worth the devastation of the exposure. Don't let your heart write checks that your career can't cash. Keep your work life and your love life in two completely different universes. Because when they collide, the one with the least power is always the one left standing in the rain. So, I want to turn this over to you. I know I'm not the only one who has navigated these murky waters. Have you ever blurred the lines between professional and personal? And more importantly, do you think it's ever possible for a relationship between a boss and an employee to actually work out? Or is it always doomed to fail due to the power imbalance? I want to hear your stories and your take in the comments below. Let's have a real conversation about this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.